Hello, everybody. In my AHE 613 Research Analysis and Interpretation class, I'm Dan Tarker, and I am going to be presenting for you today my outline for my literature review, the introduction, the outline, and what I have so far for the conclusion. And my last presentation went about 30 minutes because I think it ran out without me realizing it. So I will be trying to keep this presentation a little briefer. So in my introduction, I just begin to talk about how we live in a crisis culture in the United States and the world. I guess you could say the world. And as you know, I'm tweaking my dissertation topic. My topic has always been around leadership. I was just going to focus on the arts and humanities, leadership and innovation and organizational change for my previous topic, but I've become fascinated by the idea of doing my dissertation on leadership and crisis management, and I think it's a very topical issue. And there's things going on at my school, which I've shared, that once again show me that the community colleges are constantly seem to be in crisis situations. So I think this is a worthwhile topic to explore. And so I talk about a little bit about the crisis culture in our country to set up the importance of this type of research. And then also talk about it within the context of community colleges and universities and small liberal arts colleges, and how we can see in the headlines and in news sites, the Chronicle of Higher Education and Inside Higher Education, that there are constantly crisis situations arising that need to be addressed around a variety of different crisis situations, including financial crisis situations, hate crimes, catastrophic weather events, Title IX and sexual harassment, uh, you name it. There's all kinds of personnel and strikes, and there's seems to be an innumerable variety of crisis situations that a college leader might have to address. So the purpose of this literature review, I state, is to investigate the theories around crisis management and leadership, and in order to establish a foundation upon which to build a multi-site case study inquiring about these issues within the context of community colleges in the Pacific Northwest. And then I go into the themes I'm going to be looking at, which I'm just going to dive right into those themes. And the first one is around leadership theories and looking at the different leadership theories that have evolved over the last 80 years or so, beginning with a traits-based leadership theory, where the idea is that people are born with certain traits and characteristics that lend themselves to leadership positions, and then moving into more behavioral-based leadership theories, which reject traits-based and look at leadership in the context of behaviors that anybody can learn and anybody can be a leader, and more specifically into transactional versus transformational leadership and that whole spectrum, and laissez-faire leadership and all the terminology around that. And also going into more contemporary collaborative and pervasive leadership theories, in which leadership is seen as a network and you're creating learning institutions and organizations, and you know how all these different types of leadership theories can fit into our analysis of crisis management. So theme two will look at crisis management, look at definitions of what a crisis is, and it should be noted that crisis management is a little more is much younger than leadership studies as far as research goes, and so you don't have as great a consistency in the research as you do with leadership theory as far as terminology and models that have been thoroughly investigated and looked at both quantitatively and qualitatively as you do with leadership theory. Though there is a lot of literature around it, and it's just that a lot of literature has come out since the 1980s. And so because it's so young, such a there's still a lot of area to explore, and there's a lot of room as far as trying to codify some stuff still, that can be used as common terminology in creating theory around this area. So I'll be looking at the definitions of a crisis, the differences between a challenge and a crisis, because some people view the two differently, that a challenge is something that comes up and can grow into a hot spot or a crisis situation. And so we'll look at that and how to, take a challenging situation and prevent it from becoming a full-blown crisis. The theories of crisis management versus crisis leadership, there's some ideas around there that say crisis leadership is more about preventing the crisis, having a planning process and a crisis management team in place to anticipate things that might arise and to plan for it so that when the inevitable does happen, because it's not if a crisis will happen, it's usually when it's going to happen, that you can address it uh, in a more efficient manner. So looking at that, and then, yeah, like I said, preparation for a crisis is a whole area of research that needs to be documented and explored in terms of this research study, because that's an important facet, because some leaders don't focus enough on it and others do, and what is the difference in the organization's reaction depending on how prepared they are in terms of when a crisis happens. And then the stages of addressing a crisis, from the initial just addressing and communicating about what the crisis is and what's happening, to learning from it at the end of the crisis process. There's a learning opportunity for organizations as well, and how do leadership behaviors play into that as well. And I should add that within the leadership spectrum that I'll be looking at, I definitely feel that I want to look at it through the lens of a contingent-based leadership model, meaning that I think leadership is very context-based, and that certain leadership behaviors are going to lend themselves more to a crisis situation than others, and that there are leadership behaviors that work perfectly in a normal everyday situation. There's leadership behaviors that work best in an organizational change process that's not really dealing with a crisis, and then there's different leadership behaviors that are better suited for a crisis situation, and those are fruitful areas to highlight and explore. Then theme three is to look at crisis and leadership and bringing those two together. Looking at crisis as an opportunity for organizational change is an area that I think is interesting, because everything's going to get shaken up in a crisis, and it does provide an opportunity for organizational change if it needs to happen. And one could argue that a crisis might be a signal that organizational change does need to happen. And then what behaviors and skills fit into that kind of context. And then finally, the fourth theme is looking at leadership in terms of higher education. There's some research around crisis leadership within universities and small liberal arts colleges, and a little bit around community colleges, but not a lot, and that's definitely an opportunity. As I state in the conclusion, that as far as strengths and limitations, the strengths of the leadership aspect is that there is a lot of research and there's a lot of common terminology and agreed upon models and theory around leadership. But around crisis management, there's not quite as much, and certainly doesn't seem as unified. So that brings us to the idea that there are limitations and there are strengths to this, and that there's a lot of literature, gaps in the literature that can be explored. And then finally, looking at moving forward, that within the context of community colleges, there's just not a lot so far that I found. So there's definitely gaps in the literature that can be explored, especially in terms of executive leadership and how executive leaders handle different crises, crisis situations, and what behaviors are linked to more positive outcomes for those leaders and for those organizations. So that's where I am with my outline and introduction and conclusion. Definitely welcome any feedback you might have about other areas I might need to think about as I continue this literature literature review process. Thank you, and I hope you all have a wonderful Saturday evening, or Sunday evening if you watch this video on Sunday. Take care. Bye.